when they put the lectionary together that we prepared, I think they left out the first few verses of this, because you all have heard in September, 2 weeks from Mark chapter 8 and Mark chapter 9, two of the predictions of Jesus talking about him being rejected, him dying, and his rising again. These are the verses that come immediately before the gospel that I read today from chapter 10. They were on their way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus went ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Taking the 12 aside again, he began to tell them what was going to happen to him. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit on him, scourge him, and put him to death. But after 3 days he will rise. Immediately, the next verse, James and John, sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said, Father, we want you, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. You see, it kind of loses its impact, doesn't it? You know? If you remember back in September, and I know it's clear as a bell for you, that in the first time Jesus talks about his death, Peter steps forward shocked and rebukes. It says in Mark, he said he rebukes Jesus. And you remember that Jesus, he says, it can't happen. It can't happen that way, Lord. And you remember that Jesus turns and says, get behind me, Satan. You're thinking like men do and not like God does. You know. And then the next week we had from chapter 9, Jesus the prediction, and they didn't say anything, but what were they? But they were arguing, and Jesus knows them. And you remember what they were arguing about, right? You remember? Who was greatest? You know? And he did. At that time, again, he said, you've got to be the slave of all, the servant of all. Third and last prediction, the way Mark has put this gospel together, is that this is the last, you know? If you read, go home, you can read Mark in a snap before the game, and you can really, it'll be done in a snap. It's a very short book. But what you're going to find is, he does one more healing, and then he's in Jerusalem, and in 6 days, and the way Mark tells it, he's dead. I mean, the way he set this thing up. So, I mean, we're talking about something that's immediate. You know, and you get that if you read it, you say, oh my God, he wasn't just kidding. He's in Jerusalem, he's welcomed with joy, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And he's rejected, he's betrayed, etc. You know the story as well as I do. But what Jesus keeps saying over and over again, and maybe Mark keeps repeating it over and over again. And you remember that Mark is very, very critical of the apostles, right? Nobody presents the apostles and disciples in a darker light. Jesus is constantly saying, do you still not believe? Do you still not understand? He's constantly kind of correcting. Matthew, Luke, and John are much kinder to the apostles. But you know what? We really are like those disciples. You know, in a place like Washington, what Jesus says is not the way it works, is it? You know? Whoever will be great among you will be your servant. That isn't the way it works in this town, is it? No? I mean, does it work that way in your office? Not really. But what Jesus says is the truth. If you want true greatness, if you guys and gal want to really catch fire with Christ, we have to follow him. You know, in your marriage and in your life and in your work and with your children, you've got to serve. But more than that, not just your own family. We're called to be a living testament of love, a living vision of God's presence. This is the invitation, not just for those who are preparing for sacraments, but for all of us. We've heard it 3 times. We need to take it seriously. I do, you do, we do. Not just those who are preparing for sacraments as adults. We need to know that what Jesus says is true. That he is in his day, when he says he'll be the slave of all, there was slavery in his day. And it wasn't pleasant. There was slavery. The Romans made whole countries slaves. It was not your present picture. Not that slavery could ever be that pleasant. But so when he says, how can that turn like this? And when he says he gives his ransom for the many, he gives his life for all of us. And willingly, anxiously to serve and set us free. And he can make that true for us. We can live in a different way, a way that really sets our life on fire. And God's grace is there to help us do that, to catch fire. Listen again, as Jesus says, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for a ransom for the many.